Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin is doing everything he can to turn his football team into the Georgia Bulldogs. In fact, he wants to turn Ole Miss into Georgia the same way Kirby Smart built the Georgia program, bringing in more size and better players along the line of scrimmage. And I'm not just saying this. Lane Kiffin actually said this himself. I saw on social media about a few days ago, someone tweeted that Lane Kiffin looked at Georgia's sidelines and realized he needed to get bigger in the trenches, and immediately in the transfer portal alone, he gets left tackle Diego Pounds, who's 6'6", 330 from North Carolina. Walter Nolan, a defensive lineman from A&M, former five-star, 6'4", 340. Jerquan Scott, 6'4", 330, a guy who started 12 games last year for Southern Miss at left guard. And then two offensive linemen from Washington. I believe they're both guards. Julius Bulow, 6'8", 315, and Nate Kalepo, 6'6", 341. So that was the tweet, and Lane Kiffin quoted that tweet and just said facts. He knows what it takes to win a national championship. He coached with Alabama, or under Nick Saban at Alabama. He's a really, really good coach. And I could tell after Ole Miss lost to Georgia 52-17 last year that Lane knew, okay, I just played a championship caliber team. We got the doors blown off of us. It wasn't even close. How do I get better? Well, he said, how did Kirby Smart make Georgia better, right? He transformed the offensive line and defensive line, two things or position groups that were, weaknesses at Georgia during the Mark Richt years. Kirby came in and said, no, we're going to get bigger and better in the trenches. And they've had one of the more dominant offensive lines and defensive lines in college football. Lane Kiffin saw that, and he said, that's exactly what I have to do. I saw what Georgia's doing. I'm going to do the same thing. He knows Georgia's the standard, right? Michigan's not the standard. I know they won the last national championship, but even Michigan's will tell you, Georgia's still the standard. We had our season, but when you look at the top program in college football, the team that's doing the best, the team that's still on the rise, that's not going anywhere, it's the Georgia Bulldogs. And Lane Kiffin said it himself. Facts. He got bigger in the trenches for sure. He added 4 offensive linemen and one of the best defensive linemen in the transfer portal. Overall, he's added weapons all over the place, defensive backs, wide receivers. He's done a tremendous job using the transfer portal to make his team better, but it all starts on the offensive line. They were outmanned by Georgia and Alabama in that group. And I say this all the time. When Dean and I are walking on the field pre-games, watching teams warm up, we can look at the offensive and defensive lines of the opponent and say, okay, this team's going to have a hard time with this Georgia group. So is this team. So is this team. The only team that we watch during pregame and say, okay, this team can match up. They've got the size and strength on the offense and defensive line that can match with Georgia. It's Alabama. And Alabama matches Georgia's strength and intensity in the line of scrimmage. And that's one of the big reasons why they continue to beat Georgia outside of that national championship. And I remember walking on the field, between the hedges and looking at that offensive line that Ole Miss brought to town. I remember thinking, man, they just don't have the size. There's no way they are winning this game. And there's no way they could beat Georgia. Ole Miss was a really good team last year. I think they ended up in the top 10 after that really important win for them. Down the stretch against Penn State. That's who it was. But Ole Miss could have played Georgia 10 times last year, and they would have lost every single time. And Lane Kiffin knows it. And he said, you know what? I've got to model my program after the Georgia Bulldogs because he knows that's the standard. That's the program. If you want to build a championship caliber roster, you do what Georgia's doing. Now, he's got to do a little better on the recruiting trail. In fact, this is what Lane Kiffin said after Ole Miss's just brutal loss to the Dogs this past year. He said, they dominated us on offense. They kept the quarterback clean, rushed for over 300 yards. We have to recruit at a higher level. We've signed 1 5-star. They've signed 24. So yeah, they're going to have to add more talent, through the high school ranks, through recruiting, which matters. It matters. But they're doing it in a different way than Georgia because they're adding more from the transfer portal, right? They're going to probably do that every year, add more pieces than Georgia does because Georgia wants to recruit their own, keep them, develop them, and then send them off to the NFL. Then add some pieces through the transfer portal that are needed at the time. But they still want, their recruiting base, their recruiting strategy is how they want to keep up this winning that they've got going on in the program. But Lane knew it. When he saw Georgia run for 300 yards 8.6 yards at carry on his defense. I think that flipped a switch with Lane. He said, you know what? Now I know the biggest weakness on my team. That was the worst game they played, and mainly because Georgia was the best team that they played all season long. That's a fact. At the time, I know Georgia would lose to Alabama later, but Georgia was better than Alabama the entire regular season. And Ole Miss they didn't get blown out by Alabama. It was a solid loss, but they had no shot at beating Georgia. Where they played that week, 3 weeks before, 3 weeks later, they were never, ever beating Georgia. And Lane Kiffin knows it. And so he went out and he got two offensive linemen from Washington, and I believe they won the Joe Moore Award as the best offensive line in college football. So he said, you know what? I'm going to go get two of the best on the best offensive line in college football, bring them in. I'm going to go get this kid who started 12 games for Southern Miss at left guard, bring him in. I'm going to bring another promising kid from North Carolina who's got some experience to him. So he's revamping everything. He wants them to get bigger and stronger in the trenches. And I think he knew that going into the Georgia game, that they were a little small, and that's probably going to be a reason why they were not going to win. But after that game, when he saw Georgia just do whatever they wanted, easily, I might add, he knew, okay, I've got to hit the portal hard. I've got to go get bigger. That's what Georgia did. They changed their offensive line from a weakness to a strength. Defensive line, when they were pumping out nobody going into the NFL draft, and they went years and years and years, I feel like, several years without having a defensive line drafted. Now they have a defensive line who just went number 1 overall. Another in Jordan Davis, another top 10 pick, right, in Jalen Carter. Now they're turning into one of the better defensive line schools in the country. And that's what Kirby Smart did. When he took Georgia over, he said, it's got to start in the trenches. I got my quarterback, Jacob Eason. I got Jake Fromm, and we would eventually find out that neither one of them would be better than Stetson Bennett and Carson Beck for that matter. But he started in the trenches, and you saw that from 2015 and 2016, how much better it got 2017, 2018, 2019, and, on forward. That's what Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin need to do right now. So I thought it was a big statement where some rando guy, Ole Miss fan, tweeted something on Twitter saying, hey, after that Georgia loss, Lane Kiffin knew he had to add more beef. And Lane Kiffin just quote tweets it, right, and says, facts. That's exactly right. We got run over by the Dogs, and I wanted to get bigger. You can't teach size. You have to go get size. You have to recruit size. And that's what he did. And he's trying to build his program the way Kirby Smart built Georgia. It's going to be tough because Ole Miss is not Georgia. They'll never be Georgia, ever. I mean, they're Ole Miss. I mean, it's a stepping stone program. It's a stepping stone job for Lane. Eventually, if he has another really good season like they were last year, that was one of the best Ole Miss seasons in football history that they've ever had. If he has one more of those, 2 at the most, he's gone. And he's not staying at Ole Miss forever. I would be very, very surprised if he did that. Because again, it's a stepping stone job. That's not a long-term job. If you do well there, you're going to get opportunities elsewhere, and then boom, you're gone. So Lane Kiffin, depending on how he does next year and the year after that, could be in a position where he'll be able to leave for a better job. But that means he did it right at Ole Miss, and that means he did turn them into something that maybe looks like Georgia in any type of way. But he does have them on the rise, and now he went and got some big, massive dudes on the offensive line, and then added Walter Nolan, who is just a giant himself. He could put on the interior of that defensive line. So as well as they did in the transfer portal, I think you have to give him an A+ for what he did on the offensive line. That was the weakness, a reason why they could not get over the Alabama and Georgia hump, and he's doing everything he can to fix that problem, and that's bring in bigger guys. And they're going to be bigger next year. I don't know if they're going to be a better football team. I think they could take a step forward, even though they did lose their star running back to Ole Miss. Ohio State from Ole Miss. They're going to have a good team. On paper, they are probably one of the 12 more talented teams in the country. Wouldn't surprise me at all. And the schedule's not bad, for them. I mean, Georgia's schedule is a lot harder than theirs. Florida's, Alabama's, Texas, Oklahoma. I think all those teams have a tougher schedule than Ole Miss does. So with conference realignment, it's going to be a little tougher than it was last year for them, but it's still manageable. With that roster that they have and an experienced quarterback coming back, bigger guys, experienced guys on the offensive line, Ole Miss could have a really, really good season. But they're not going to be better than Georgia next year. Maybe they'll be better than Alabama. Maybe they could be better than Texas, but they've still got a way to go before they can catch the Dogs. But Lane Kiffin knows it. He said, that's the program I want to model mine after. I want to fix Ole Miss the way Kirby Smart fixed Georgia. It's a big statement, and it's something that I think Kirby has to kind of smile about when he hears that, because everyone wants to do to their program what Kirby Smart has done to Georgia. He's turned them into a national powerhouse, a team that's going to contend for championships every single year. Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, they want to do that badly, so they're going to do what Georgia does. Makes sense. Thanks for watching this video. Really appreciate it. You can read everything we have over on Dawg Post by signing up to our free newsletter. That link is down below. Make sure you do that. Thanks for watching this video. Hope to see you over on the website.